Stacey Feldman was a beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed lady who lived in Denver, Colorado. She was a wife and a mother of 2 children named Sydney and Charlie. She had met her husband, Robert, years before, and they had ultimately fallen in love, getting married back in 2005 before starting a family together and moving into a beautiful home in Denver, Colorado. Her husband, Robert, was a meat wholesaler, and Stacey worked for a company called Partners Seeking a Cure, which was a non-profit organization looking into research, awareness, support, and ultimately seeking a cure for those suffering from a very rare liver disease. The family were also poignant members of their Jewish community, regularly visiting their synagogues. They were friends with all of their neighbors, and from the outside looking in, you would think that the Feldmans had it all. A beautiful home, 2 children, and a happy marriage. The all-American family, but that wasn't until March 1st, 2015, when Robert called 911 at around 3 p.m. from his home in Denver to report that he'd found his wife, Stacey, unresponsive in the bathtub with the shower running cold water. Now, when the ambulance and police officers arrived on the scene, they were led upstairs, where Stacey lay on the master bedroom floor completely naked, with just a small towel covering her private areas. Her husband, Robert, told paramedics that he had been trying to perform CPR on his wife. Paramedics did what they could for Stacey, but from the outset it seemed that things would be futile, as she did not respond to treatment. But she was transported to the local hospital, where Stacey Feldman would subsequently be pronounced dead. Officers tried to gather as much information as they could from Robert. Stacey was a young, healthy mother. She had not been unwell recently, and it just seemed odd. Paramedics told officers that Robert had been acting very strangely in the home that day when they arrived. They told how Robert had been found wandering around looking vacant and dazed, not upset and anxious as you would expect. He was apparently being overly dramatic. He seemed to be screaming, then wailing, but it looked like an act and not real to them in any way. At some points, while they were trying to perform CPR on Stacey, the paramedics had to actually pull Robert off her while he launched himself against her whilst wailing. He was also purposely avoiding questions when they asked him questions they needed to know the answers to, as to, like, what time he found her, or whether she'd been unwell lately, that kind of thing. When the detectives asked him if he had found Stacey face down or face up, Robert said he did not know and then walked away from them. It seemed odd. Robert made it clear that he did not want an autopsy performed on his wife, which also seemed odd to officers, as would you not want to know what had happened to your wife, the mother of your children? Detectives now felt that Robert was acting so suspiciously that they wanted to find out how Stacey had passed. And in May, Robert contacted detectives, asking them about what was going on with the case. Whilst on the phone, they asked him what he had been doing that day, the day of his wife's death, to build up a timeline. This time, Robert seemed more forthcoming. He told officers that the night before, the couple had been to a party where they had drunk together before Stacey had eaten some edibles, and he was not sure if she'd gone out to smoke the green stuff. The next day, it was the temple's carnival, but Stacey had gotten out of bed. She felt too unwell, so Robert had offered to take the children to the carnival by himself. Now, while Stacey stayed home, she got some further rest. He told officers that he then left the carnival between 9:30, 10 a.m., then came home around noon, which seemed strange as the synagogue was only 2 miles from the house, so what was he doing for an hour and a half? Now, when he got back to the house, he told officers that he went straight into the laundry room to change his clothes, and he apparently shouted out for Stacey, but she did not reply. He then told officers that he fixed a shelf in the garage before going back into the house and finding Stacey in the bath. But behind the scenes, detectives had been speaking to paramedics. They had retrieved all this information from them, taken statements about his behaviour, and they were also trying to find out more about how Stacey had died. Now, on the initial assessment of Stacey's body, they did note many injuries, but there was no internal bleeding, so further tests needed to be carried out. Initially, her death was labelled as undetermined, but the doctors did note the injuries including abrasions and bruising. Now, after this, Robert called Stacey's sister to tell her that Stacey's death had been ruled an accident. He told her that Stacey had slipped on a hair conditioner bottle and then fell into the bath and drowned. But Stacey's sister did not seem convinced. She thought this sounded really crazy and contacted the detective on the case to tell him what Robert had said and to ask if that was true. Stacey's sister also told officers that Robert had told other family members that at noon he had got home and walked the dog, something that he'd not mentioned before. It was also said that the synagogue that day had been calling Robert, asking him why he had not picked the kids up in time. 3 weeks after the case began, officers received a letter. It was anonymous. It contained a full list of inconsistencies in the case, things that Robert had said that did not line up. Someone was obviously concerned with his statements. It mentioned how the children had not been picked up from the temple when they should have been, that they'd been calling Robert, asking where he was, and he wasn't answering. It also mentioned that Stacey had been messaging with a friend that morning, where they had arranged to meet up at the temple at noon, but obviously she never made it. On the 4th of May, the post-mortem results came back, showing that Stacey's death had been put down as an unknown cause. The toxicology results showed that there were no substances in her system, which again begged the question, why did Robert say that she'd eaten edibles the night before and that she'd possibly smoked the green stuff? Then, on June the 11th, a tip-off came in to Crime Stoppers, saying that this lady had met Robert on an online dating site and she needed to speak to officers. Her name was Susan McBride, and she had met Robert on Tinder. Now, detectives arranged to meet Susan the following day. She told them that initially the pair would speak on Tinder. Then it moved to emails and later into phone calls. He told Susan to call his work phone and that would transfer her to his mobile, but he never gave her his actual mobile number. He would also not tell her his last name, eventually telling her it was Wolf, which we know was a lie because his name was Robert Feldman. The couple had met for coffee around the 23rd of Feb, only 6 days before his wife's death. Susan told the officers that a couple of days after this, they met for dinner, and then that evening they ended up having sex. Robert told Susan that he was a divorcee, but Susan decided to try and look Robert up online. There was a few things that just weren't ringing true to her. Why did he not give her his mobile phone? Why was he not wanting to tell her his surname? And she also felt that he was maybe lying about being divorced. So she looked him up, and on doing so, Susan found that Robert had a last name of Feldman, and that he was actually married and the couple still lived together. So when she confronted Robert about all of this information she had found about him, Robert had an excuse. He told her that him and Stacey were divorced, but they could not afford 2 separate houses, so they had one, and they alternated who would stay with the children. It seemed plausible. And then after that, the couple did not see each other for a bit. The couple then met up again around March the 26th. By now, unbeknown to her, it was 3 weeks after Stacey's death. But after this, Robert started making up excuses about why they couldn't meet up. But she had more information that would blow this case out of the water. Susan told detectives that on the morning of the 1st of March, the day Stacey died, she had found Stacey's email address and thought about messaging her and actually asking her outright if the couple was still together or not. In the end, she did just that. Not long after sending this email, Susan received an email back from Stacey saying that Robert and her were very much still a married couple, still living together and with children. Susan, angry at being lied to, sent Stacey photos of email exchanges between the two of them, what he had been saying about being divorced. She even sent Robert's wife her telephone number, and at 8:52 a.m. that morning, Stacey rang her husband's girlfriend and the pair chatted for some time. Susan started at the beginning, telling Stacey how the two had met on Tinder. She told what Robert had said about the marriage and how they'd been divorced, how the pair apparently didn't live together anymore, and that they had met up for sex. Now, Robert's wife, Stacey, had told Susan that this was not the first time she had caught him cheating. Stacey told Susan that she was done with Robert and no longer wanted anything more to do with him, and she would get a divorce. Was this a coincidence that all of this happened on exactly the same day that she would later, within a couple of hours, be found dead? Detectives thought not. Another call to detectives came in from Stacey's sister, where Robert had spoken to her on the phone and mentioned how he was waiting for a large life insurance policy to pay out. Detectives found out which company it was and spoke to them, where they confirmed that an insurance policy was taken out in Stacey's name for the sum of $750,000. When detectives came out to speak with Robert, he pretended not to be home. When they got back to the office, the medical examiner called to say that Robert had called them to ask if there were any changes to the autopsy. So had he seen them at the house? Realised that they were coming and possibly to arrest him, so he'd rung the medical examiner's office to see if there were any updates. On October the 24th, 2016, the lead detective met with a specialist doctor who worked solely with DV, compression to the neck victims, suffocation victims. The detective told how Stacey's medical record had come back as undetermined, and he said he'd take a look. He examined Stacey. He reported that her cause of death was that of suffocation and or manual strangulation, with other blunt force injuries. The problem was that this doctor was not authorized to sign off on autopsies in the state of Colorado. Almost 3 years after this case began, Robert Feldman was arrested for the murder of his wife Stacey, and not long after this, Robert bonded out on a $1 million bond. He went home, where Robert was told he had to stick to home confinement, but Robert refused to stick to this, going to his doctor, telling him that he needed to have it written in that he was allowed to go for these 1-hour walks each day for exercise, and it was written in, so he was allowed to go out for this walk for 1 hour a day. Robert was seen riding his bike around. He was also seen in cafes, stores, and restaurants, and not just in his own town but other towns. Now in 2019, a probate court case started after Robert had claimed this $750,000 for life insurance. He'd given $500,000 of it to this lawyer to represent him, but the family felt that the money should have gone to the children. The probate court agreed with the family. By now, the cash was drying up, and Robert's lawyer withdrew his work for the case, leaving Robert to be represented by a public defender. Robert was not happy with this, so he took this case to the Supreme Court, who sided with him. They found that the family must have acted too late and that the cash had already been given to a third party, i.e. the lawyer. So he was able to go ahead with this lawyer. Now, Robert continued to meet women on Tinder, inviting some back to the house. One woman claimed Robert assaulted her upstairs in the property, although no charges were filed. It was almost 7 years before this case ended up starting in court, with Robert's lawyers arguing that the medical examiner had determined that it was still undetermined how she died. They spoke about how this latest doctor who had seen Stacey had not been allowed to sign off on medical cases in the state of Colorado, and the defense got this doctor on the stand. He spoke of many injuries that were found upon Stacey, including bleeding within her eyes, compression to the neck, bruising on her outer thighs as if she had been held down by straddling at the time of her death, the fact that her watch had still been on her wrist when she was in the bath, which was unusual because if she got in the bath you would have taken it off. It was not waterproof. They also told how Robert had called the medical examiner's office many times, the first time to tell them not to carry out a post-mortem. They told of how he acted the day and after, things that he had said to the family, the life insurance policy, and what Susan had said about speaking with Stacey that morning. After 2 hours of deliberations, the jury found Robert guilty of murdering his wife Stacey. Her family were completely relieved that there was eventually some justice, that they could eventually put all this behind them and move on for the sake of the children. The judge passed a life sentence to Robert without the possibility of parole. The DA issued a statement saying, "Despite his creative efforts, Robert Feldman has been found guilty of murdering his wife, Stacey Feldman, I'm extremely proud of the work of our prosecutors, investigators, victim advocates and support staff, and the Denver police detectives who never gave up on securing justice for Stacey. Moreover, I thank the jury for performing their civic duty these last 3 weeks. I would love to hear your thoughts on this case, guys. Let me know in the comment section below. If you have enjoyed today's video, there are many more here to watch on YouTube as well as on TikTok, and you can follow along for more on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram and YouTube, all at Crime Stories Obsessed. Always here, remembering the victims and their families. Their stories will always live on.